Hey, you're listening to the Intentional Documentary Podcast. So glad to have you. Around here, I'm gushing over the stories behind the pictures that we freaking love of our own lives. You know, the ones we hold as high value and iconic, because this is where photography meets real life. I'm your host, Marie Moss, and I believe that the best way to approach your photography is through your lens, your way. Through insightful conversations with photographers, I'll explore preserving life with your camera and using what lights you up to grow your brand. Let's get started. Hey there, I am so excited for this episode because I've been feeling like I've been holding my breath with this big secret to share with you that I'm going to tell you all about today. But first, if you are 100% over the moon elated with photography and you're happy as a clam working towards your big goals in your work and your business, this episode is not for you and the message doesn't apply. You can literally skip this one. But if you're loving it, but it feels a little different than it used to, maybe it's not as fun as it once was, then it's gut check time. And that's what we're doing today. This is about taking a look at your photography journey and where you're headed. It's important to do this once in a while so that you find or continue to find fulfillment in this thing that you're spending so much time on. If we don't pay attention, we can drift down this unwanted path without realizing it until we're so far gone that we're like, holy crap, we're so far from where we wanted to be. But in our case, with making pictures, that could mean we could make our last picture and realize, oh man, there's so many more pictures I wish I would have made. You know what I mean? So I'll kick this thing off by sharing a couple mistakes that I've made in my journey and have heard similar stories from several of my photographer buddies that have sparked this feeling of resentment towards our cameras and this gift that we have. And then I'm so excited to share what's been my anchor, my home base, what's kept me grounded, true to myself, and helped me maintain that wonderful documentary state of mind, that love affair with photography that I know you know what I'm talking about. Finally, we'll wrap with some gut check questions, some that you can take away after this episode. So let's go ahead and get started. Here's the backstory. I had no photography knowledge until I had a baby. I know, such a common story. You probably already know this, but I jumped in with a 365 photo a day project literally the day she was born, Halloween night 2011. My 365 project lasted for 3 years and 3 months straight. In that time, I couldn't get enough of it. The learning and the growth, the shooting, the editing, the sharing, and even the mental shooting when I didn't have a camera in hand. You know what I mean? Like when you're not shooting, but you just see frames everywhere. I was addicted in the best way. I think what I loved most was that I was doing something for myself that made me feel really good. The pictures were just a bonus. And I find this interesting because I should have been feeling good regardless. I mean, I just had a baby within the last few years. We were starting our family. My health was fine. My direct sales business that I was doing at the time was fine. It kept me busy and financially secure. My husband had a great job and insurance, which was important because we had just moved to the United States. I mean, overall life was good, but internally, I didn't know what I was going to do next with my life. And I mean, I guess career-wise in terms of my job. I never wanted to be a full-time stay-at-home mom. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It just was not for me. Personally, I was terrified to become a mom at all because I was afraid I was too selfish. I wanted something that was for me. My direct sales business wasn't really in my heart anymore. And I didn't have a college education. Long story. I actually think I have it planned to tell you a little bit more about this later on, but I'm a college dropout. I had made plans to retire from this job that I was at. I literally thought I was going to be there forever, but then God laughed at those plans as I hit my rock bottom, known as foreclosure, by 22 years old. Point being, in this time when photography was weaving itself into my life, There were a lot of thoughts about who I was going to be and what I was going to do swirling in my head. My pride had been hit, and I felt out of control of my life as a new mom. That the mom part didn't really have much to do with it. I believed my options and what I could do were limited because of the lifestyle I was currently in. Photography was something I could do for me, and it was something that I felt like I could control, so it felt fun. It was energizing. It was my escape. You know what it's like when you're behind the lens and you're just on fire, and it's like the whole world fades away and you're just in that moment. There's not a problem in your mind because you're just in it. And I loved it. But shortly after I discovered this love for making pictures, I made 2 huge mistakes that I can now see in hindsight, and I'm hoping to help you avoid. Mistake number 1, I dismissed the Marie in my work. Let's face it, when you start out as a photographer, you have no idea who you are inside of your work. But I do know I had a belief around what being a photographer meant, and I chased that. I had this ideal of what those pictures as a professional photographer needed to be like, and I tried like hell to be that. And what I did was I created this tunnel vision for myself. It even evolved. When I think back, I started with my prop and Pinterest days, as I call them, where I worked for creative, flawless, super cute type of portrait images, semi-lifestyle. And then even when I moved into being more of this wholesome documentary photographer, which I was doing all along underneath the prop and Pinterest stuff, in my documentary stuff, I was working to tell a story. I was obsessed with making sure that every picture or series of pictures told a very strong story. I talk about this in episode 5 with the whole, you must make pictures that elicit emotion from the viewer rant that has been the most thank you type commented episode on this podcast. I get DMs and emails on that one quite a bit. I was trying to fit into this box, this list of criteria that I told myself was the way that it had to be. It was like I had to be that in order to have a legit identity as a photographer or something. I don't really know. All I know is that the cost of this mistake, by dismissing myself and not really learning about myself and then going for it, or just going for it without needing to know why, well, there's actually 2 costs. Number 1 was I just lost sight of that unique view on the world entirely. I never allowed myself to explore it at first because I was trying to fit in with everything that I saw. I did get great, meaningful, very Marie-y photographs along the way too. Those ended up being my breadcrumbs later on that showed me what this thing really does for me and what I want to put into my pictures. But I could have done more. I could have done better, and I could have went faster if I just would have followed my own path. Instead, I'd sit there beating up my images so much that I stopped shooting and I stopped keeping what really mattered to me. I'd probably overlooked them. I can't imagine how many I've deleted that would have actually been a great moment. And there's actually one picture that's coming to mind that I put in my 365 book. I made a book after 5 years of the first 5 years. And there's a few pictures that I did not edit the first time around, that when I went back to, I was like, why in the world would I have skipped over this? And it was because I wasn't a documentary photographer back then, and I didn't think that was okay, and those pictures didn't mean much to me. But they actually really do, and they have really mattered all along. But because I was trying to be this certain quote-unquote type of photographer, I dismissed the Marie in my work. And I'm wondering, could you be doing the same? Maybe you're not, and I hope not. But for me, I was. And a sign of that was the fun of photography felt different. It never totally went away, but looking at my pictures was more like this killjoy because of the judgment I was placing on them. So here's an example. I have this vivid memory of being in my son's bedroom. I had recently noticed pictures with soft, muted highlights, and there's this one picture or type of a picture that stood out, and basically all it is like when sunlight is shining through blinds, window blinds, and the light is on a wall, then you have stripes on the wall, right? Being new to all of this back then, I was in love with the vibe of that. I loved when it was just that shadow and light pattern was just on a wall, or when it cast across somebody, and somewhere between consciously and subconsciously, I sought to find that in my real life. I wouldn't say I hunted for it. It wasn't something like, oh, I need to go make a picture of that. But I started to notice it. It affected how I saw. So that day, that memory of being in my son Levi's room, I saw light pouring in through the blinds, and I made our daughter go sit in front of the wall in that light and tried making portraits of her, basically like the ones that I had seen. But my friend, if you know me at all as a photographer, you know I don't care for directed portraits very much. They don't do anything for me. No offense at all if you love them. I mean, to each his own. There's nothing wrong with them. But my whole heart, Marie's whole heart, is in pictures that represent a true story in my life, something that I've anchored in as valuable. That's what I want to bottle up in a photograph. So why would I go through that process of going and sitting her in this particular light to create this picture that doesn't matter to me? I mean, to play devil's advocate, yeah, it's good to explore things that aren't your norm. You might discover things that you're actually truly interested in. You're growing your technical skill and all of that. But if I'm being honest, that's not why I was doing it. I was doing it because that's what I saw. And I thought that I had to have these cool patterns and this, I was just in a different mindset of what I had to be a quote unquote great photographer. For a long time, I shot with a 50mm lens and was the queen of making meaningful detail photos that walked the edge of any kind of actual composition. But somewhere along the way, I drifted away from that and didn't even notice. I drifted away from how I was shooting because of what I kept seeing other people doing. I was so in tune with the photography community, mainly social media, and wanting to be better and hit this list of qualifications that I told myself that, again, I dismissed my unique way of seeing the world, how I view the world, and exploring that. So yes, I still got Marie photos along the way. I know I already mentioned that, but I have to say that far more, the story was like I'd see, say, a gorgeous photograph of a child with a polar bear at the zoo, where the polar bear's swimming or whatever animal, and the kid's in front of the aquarium and the light is just right and the composition is just spot on. And that picture is full of curiosity and wonder, and there's a majestic vibe to it. So then I'd go to the zoo with that image imprinted in my head because it made an impact. It was a great photo. That photographer crushed it. So then I found that I would look for opportunities to make, quote unquote, that kind of photograph. So in this context, I try to make a picture that embodies curiosity and wonder. But remember, that's not my truth. That's not what lights me up. My truth is in making pictures that represent an honest story that I've already anchored in as a valuable memory. Do you see the difference? It's different. Not one is not better than the other. Maybe the curiosity and wonder one would relate to more people around the globe, but the one that matters to me in my heart, there's something about there's an anchored in memory in that photograph for me, or when I was shooting clients, it was for them too. That was the goal that I worked towards. I can only imagine how much I would have grown if I would have focused more on myself and how I see and exploring that without judgment. And you think about that for you and where you're at right now. Are you feeling influenced? Are you dismissing yourself? I'm going to get into the questions later, but just hopefully that put some perspective on for the moment before we get into mistake number 2. Mistake number 2 definitely set in once I started my business. As I started my photography business, I began to race and I didn't even know it. I lived in the shoot and share factory. I mean, I was just this churning conveyor belt of photographs. I wanted to grow my skill and be acknowledged for it. I wanted success in my business. And when you seek out learning, especially learning business, how to run a successful business, and oh my goodness, the online marketing, online business stuff, there's so much noise to grow, get more clients, scale your business, master your craft, make pictures that speak to the viewer and be profitable and all these things that get in your head. And I don't know about you, but I felt this unspoken vibe for this desire of fame. And I really did feel it. It's not like I ever got super obsessed with it or anything, but I know it feels good. I spoke on Creative Live with Kirsten Lewis. It felt amazing. I could, that would be so cool to be in this position where you're super sought out and all this stuff. So in this growth environment and sort of just seeing all the different possibilities of how far one could go being a photographer or being in business, making a photograph that impacts the world, I got caught up in that. And I'd do more of what I thought that I should do. I would try to write in a way that I thought clients wanted to hear. I focused on talking about the benefits of having pictures rather than talking about the pictures themselves or me and my stories in my life. I curated pictures that I shared that felt relatable rather than something that really moved me, which was what I was trying to sell. So where the logic is in that, I don't know. There wasn't Marie in any presence in interaction with potential clients. She was trying to keep up and move the needle. She was just busy working the wheel behind the scenes. And the real cost in that was that I dimmed my own light. I was so busy arguing for the value of the type of pictures I was selling while simultaneously wearing the judgment hat where I'd only show my technically flawless photos, in my opinion anyway, for whatever that's worth, or I was looking for the common things that we see in our community, the stuff that is really funny or it's really chaotic and showing everyday life, anything that would show sort of this humor or shock value. Again, it was highly curated, and I stopped showing what really lights me up. I remember last year I shared, or maybe it was earlier this year, I shared a photo that's just the face of a building of the pizza store. Well, it's a party store, but it's where we got pizza at my old house. And I shared the whole backstory of what that meant to me. And I just remember that felt so good. And I had gotten out of the habit of sharing stuff like that because I felt well, everyone's going to see this picture of the party store and they're going to think, well, who cares? And they're just going to scroll right over it. So I lost connection with my audience and myself thinking in that way. Along the way, I also got a heavy case of biz brain hurricane, as I call it, where I couldn't cook dinner, I couldn't take a shower, or drive to the damn store without thinking about my business. It would make me crazy. That is definitely not how I want photography or business in my life. And I'm sure you feel the same. And I hope that maybe you don't feel the same, and I really hope not. But unfortunately, I keep hearing more and more of these stories. So that's why I wanted to bring these mistakes up. And again, those mistakes are, number 1, I dismissed the Marie in my work. And number 2, I was racing. The biggest aha that I've had, and I almost cut this part out of my outline because I'm almost embarrassed to say it, especially when so many know me as somebody who's helping other people grow. But I've learned that I don't necessarily want to be an artist, much less at the top of my craft. Maybe I'll change my mind eventually. Who knows? Life is really funny like that. It's felt really wrong to say that out loud because, like I said, we're in a community that's filled with those invested in growth and making great pictures. And I'm one of those people that are showing you how to communicate to help propel you forward. And again, if that is you want to grow your work and your business to the top, then do that. Go for it. If it lights you up, that's fabulous. But for me, I was doing actions on this path to greatness because I guess I just think I got caught up in the moment, the thrill of loving what I was doing for sure, and wanting to be included with our peers who were growing so beautifully alongside me and passing me up for that matter. So I kept pushing it and pushing myself further, and that's when resentment set in. But now this undeniable wave of peace has come over me. I feel content where I'm at today, but I'm still open and growing as slow as I want to grow. And I love the way that sounds, growing as slow as I want to grow. I don't look at non-growth, being stagnant or staying the same, as a bad thing. I don't feel rushed in the hurricane of biz brain anymore. What's got me here is literally so simple. It's keeping what matters in my foresight. So there's a quote that I'm going to share in the show notes. It's something that Raina James said on the show Nashville about how important it is to keep what matters close to you. Otherwise, you start to lose sight of them. You get too much distance between you and what matters. They start to fall apart or something like that. So how do I keep what matters in my foresight? It's by giving attention to my own preservation project. So what is that? In a nutshell, it's documenting your life from a lens of what matters to you and doing something with what you've documented, not just letting things burn out on your hard drive. And no, I don't just mean printing them out. There's so much more you can do, and it's not limited to only using your camera. There's a 4-part framework to tend to the whole big picture of documenting your life. And it's truly been my checks and balances system per se. When I discovered this framework, I felt alive behind the lens again, but better. I felt free as I did before I ever learned a single lesson about making pictures and social media algorithms. I mean, can you remember shooting without perfection and judgment? I mean, that was so fun. I'm content in where I'm at in my journey. I no longer feel bad or guilty about where I'm not at yet. And even when I see like when I look through that lens of, oh, this could have been better, I feel peace for the pictures that I've made. I see more opportunities for better intentionally documenting my life, which I'm like raising my hands over here because that is the Marie in my work. Now, I always want to grow. I want to be better and all of that too, but it's not my focus. And that is really the big message here. So next week, we have a guest conversation and a new mini mag with photographer Ashley Manley. It is so good. I love that girl. So in 2 weeks, I'll share the framework for the preservation project so you can work some of these pieces for yourself. But I don't want to leave you hanging till then. So here are some reflection, gut check questions for you to journal. Now, these are all in the show notes, so don't feel like you've got to write them down in a mad dash. Just go to fearlessandframed.com/029. Number 1, who are you trying to be as a photographer and in general? Number 2, what do you believe your pictures, quote unquote, need to be like? And why? Is this a checkbox or a label? Like, are you creating that criteria, like I talked about in mistake number 1, and you don't even really know it? And is it holding you back, or is it propelling you forward? Number 3, how is the influence of others playing a role in how you see and how you view the world? Where does this influence come from? Number 4, what do you want out of photography, from shooting to business? And number 5, if you're in grow, grow, grow mode, what's the rush? And is the rush depleting the fun? So I'll leave you with that. I'll talk to you next week. Thank you for listening. If you've got a quick sec, leave a review. Utilize that space to let me know what spoke to you out of today's episode, what questions were sparked from you. Every single time that I hear from you, you spark ideas in me that I put right back into the podcast for you. So it's win-win, right? You can always hit me up over on Instagram at fearlessandframed is my handle. And as always, you can go to fearlessandframed.com/intentional documentary podcast for this episode's show notes and any mini mags and past show notes. All the goodness is over there. And until next time, what are you going to preserve next? Talk to you soon.